Welcome to Lead Smarter, the podcast where you'll hear powerful, no nonsense conversations about leadership with today's top experts and real world leaders like yourself. Get the inside strategies, insights, and secrets they've learned on the journey to lead smarter. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Katie Anderson, a leadership coach, speaker, and author who helps leaders stop defaulting to doing and start building real learning cultures. Katie is the author of Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, inspired by her work with a 40-year Toyota leader in Japan, where she studied what actually drives sustainable performance: people, learning, and systems, not heroic leaders swooping in with the answers. In this conversation, we talk about why leaders get stuck in the doer trap, how learning gets squeezed out in results driven organizations, and what it really takes to create conditions where teams think, adapt, and grow. Let's get into it. Hey, Katie, thanks again for joining me on the podcast and for getting the chance to get to know you. I really enjoyed our first call, and I am excited to talk to you about your perspective on leadership and some of the work that you're doing with your own clients and developing a community of leaders. One of the things that we were talking about when we first met, you had talked about leading to learn and redefining the role of a leader.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, you describe leadership as setting the direction, creating conditions, and developing yourself. Why is that shift so difficult for new leaders?
Yeah. Well, first, let me give you some context of what that phrase leading to learn means and where it came from. It comes from the title of my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, which I wrote out of a collaboration and partnership with a 40-year Toyota leader that I got to know when I was living in Japan a decade ago. And I was really interested in why Toyota was such a successful company, both in terms of its products, but also it's really famous for its culture, and a lot of organizations around the world are trying to adopt the Toyota production system, the Toyota way, which has often been known as like lean or lean manufacturing. There are a lot of different words for it, but at the essence, it's this learning culture. And so I was really intrigued to understand what's the secret sauce, right? And so I was asking Mr. Yoshino, who's the subject of my book, Isao Yoshino, and he kept saying, "There's no secret. There's no secret." And he said, "Actually, the only secret to Toyota is its attitude towards learning." And he said, "We don't even notice and we take it for granted." And then everything else that I put together from my experiences in working with global organizations, being an internal change leader and leader within healthcare organizations and more, came back to this simple comment that he made that I synthesized that a leader's role is simple. It's to set the direction, provide support, which is to create those conditions for people to be successful, and 3, to develop yourself. And so, it all goes back to those 3 simple things, but they're simple but not easy. And I believe these are not just challenging for new leaders to adopt, but for leaders at all levels, because we are used to doing the doing and to being the expert and the person jumping in with the right answer and saving the day. What leadership requires us to do, whether or not you're the leader of like a project team or stepping into a management leadership role or even a senior executive, is that it's no longer about you executing on everything and solving all the problems and being the technical expert in whatever your field or domain is. It's about setting the clear direction for the team, like where do we need to go, what do we need to accomplish, and then help coach, support, create the conditions and structures within the organization for people, your team members, to be able to do that. And that requires us to develop ourselves. And so that shift, though, from being an independent contributor to being in a team leader or manager role is a big shift. And so I think it can be really hard because a lot of our identity can be wrapped up into, well, if I'm not the one doing the doing, well,
Right.
what like, oh, like, how important am I? Am I not valuable? And so it's like shifting our mindset to what is the purpose of our role and how do we actually create impact? And you create exponential impact by actually creating a lot of people's capabilities to do the doing.
I actually started myself as a, let's just call it like an ops manager. So what you're describing to me, I've always tried to figure out, like, is it more of a benefit to have been the person who gets their hands dirty, does the things, and therefore they know the experience how to do it? Is it more of a benefit to be that, have
Mm,
been that person and then lead? Or is it more of a liability because then you want to jump in and you want to
yeah.
help, you want to do it yourself, versus somebody who's there to be a leader and only support, and is like counting on the expertise. And the reason I ask this question
Yeah,
is because I will try as a leader to surround myself with people that know what they're doing way better than me, and
yeah.
sometimes completely better than me because I don't know anything about developing a website or coding in this way. So
Mm,
I can't lead
yeah,
you in that activity. But having been somebody who was responsible for this thing, I might know what the experience is, what to look out for. And maybe just if I think about it, rather than trying to take over for you or do the thing for you, but now I know what it's like to have been you and what I would have benefited from if I had
mm,
a leader that was giving me the spaces I need in the
yeah.
areas that I work on. Like, do you see it as more of a benefit to have been the person and so that you know what that experience is? Or is it would it be better? Or, am I more likely to be effective as a leader who's leading a team where my whole purpose and my whole experience
Mm.
is to be that leader, to give you that space and not risk maybe trying to step in by accident because I think I know better than you?
No, I don't think it's a binary question. I think it's like it's not an either or. They come with different benefits and different challenges, just as you laid out, David. Like when you have the technical knowledge of the purpose of the group, like the product or service that you're building from the technical
Right.
side, and it is your habit comes from that place of doing. So that
Right.
can be harder to you have to even be more intentional about like what's my role? When am I the expert doer? When is my technical expertise needed? And when am I actually there to be the team leader and creating the set the direction, provide the support, right?
Right.
Now, conversely, it can be really beneficial to have someone whose expertise actually is just in leading teams no matter what the discipline or the doing is, and that can be powerful. Where that maybe is there is some downside of that is it's harder to say the clear, like, what's the direction we need to go or to be that person who's jumping in when there is help needed. So you just have to balance knowing what kind of support your team needs and just hold yourself, on where do you pull that support in and just being clear on that. But it can be much harder if you know the work to not jump into
Right.
the work. But I have to say, a lot of us have what I call the telling habit, even if we have no idea of what the work is, because we have a ton of great ideas. And so
Right.
we're like, oh, I'm going to jump in with all my ideas. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? What about this? What about that? Even if we don't really even know the technical side or the real problem to be solved. So I say we all have to break the telling habit as well. It just depends. It can what the situation is.
I completely agree. I remember myself almost like and I think maybe even other leaders that you're describing
Yeah.
have this urge to contribute
Mm.
and as opposed to lead. And I was actually going to, what do you see
Mm.
leaders getting wrong when they confuse being a strong contributor, like an individual contributor versus being an effective leader? Where do you see them getting that wrong most often?
Yeah, it all in my experience, both from my own self when I fall into what I call this doer trap and the
Right.
leaders that I work with, it doesn't come from like a malicious place. Like I'm not intentionally trying to like take it over and control it. It actually comes from a place of wanting to help and like
Right.
help move the project along, or you see someone struggling and not have the right answer right away. So I want to like just jump in and like kind of give them the answer, but then you're not really teaching them how to get to the answer.
Right.
I think where I see the risk is when that's habitual and we're like jumping in and we're being helpful, but we're actually maybe in the immediacy, we're helping in that moment to get to the answer, but we're actually not creating sustainable conditions for ongoing capability, problem solving, collaboration, and whatnot. So it's seeing the immediate thing and that immediate reward versus the bigger picture.
I find myself having a hard time finding that balance.
Yeah.
I was just having a conversation with my team. So I've got a new team member and she's being trained,
Mm,
and I am the team member that led her or has led her in the past, like
mm,
this helping her come along is very much a doer, like
mm,
effective, like knows that if she doesn't get the thing done, that it's possible that it'll slip through the cracks.
mm.
So sometimes instead of taking the time, and maybe she doesn't even have the time to make sure that the team member who's getting trained knows how it gets done, sometimes she just executes it. I find myself sometimes swinging too hard in the other direction, like asking questions that make this particular task take way longer than it should have. But
Mm,
my goal is that that person knows not just how to do it, but the context of why we're doing it and then knows
yeah.
how to make decisions. How do you find the right balance on that? How do you know when you should be giving them room to learn versus when now's the time I actually have to stop and get
Yeah.
this thing done?
Yeah, it's about being more intentional, so, like, more proactive on it rather than reactive and having that be your default state. So, Yeah, I mean, I totally can relate to that too. And one of the questions I ask leaders to reflect on it is not like you don't have to give up your expertise or your technical knowledge, but knowing and how to navigate this continuum. It's about when is it my problem to solve or my technical expertise is needed in this, and when am I there to develop the expertise of someone else? And right, and so you can still be an expert, but be showing up in more of this leader as coach role rather than I'm showing up as the expert who's taking on the execution of this task. So that's one thing. So just like it's okay, you can still own your expertise and be more coach like. And then it's
Okay.
like, yeah, we have to make trade-offs, right? Like sometimes we have a timeline that allows us to have more space to or ideally we build in some of this to our timeline so we're not always so
Right.
compressed that we can ask more questions and give someone some time to try something or go figure something out and come back and do having more of the sort of like that exploratory process and getting there. And other times, like really it's like this is due tomorrow and we don't have time. And then we have to say, this is not now a time for learning. This is a time for executing. And we need to bring in our best expertise to make this happen. The trap is when we see, and everything is this like 5 alarm fire that's like has to
Right.
be fixed now. And then we never build that capability. So it's like getting better as a leader of judging when things are urgent, critical, like a true crisis or emergency or a deadline that has to be hit now, and then how can we build in more space through the rest of our our processes so that we're not caught in that constant fight, just putting out fires and running around,
Right.
and we don't have any time to build capability or ask questions because we just got to get it done. Right? We all
I
been there like that. But there's a time and place for
yeah.
development. Like the kids running across the street and the cars coming is not the time to say, "Do you think you should stop?" And no,
That's right.
no,
I'm willing to bet. I mean, I know you working with Toyota. I'm willing to bet that that's probably a pretty heavy focus, like putting the systems in
yes,
place so that you can be as proactive as possible, so that addressing those kinds of moments where everybody has to stop and I've got to do this thing, that's an exception rather than the norm. I'm guessing that's a
correct.
big part of it.
A huge part, and especially in my time in Japan and visiting Toyota a lot and talking to Mr. Yoshino and others who have worked there, that is built into the culture, and they have a lot of time for what they call hansei, or it's the Japanese word for reflection, that learning process. It's built in to how they structure their work. There's time built in, it's part of your expectation of your daily work for doing continuous improvement or kaizen, and that includes the experimentations. They've created the structures in their organization where then learning that is the secret, and they don't even notice it's because it's already there. So we have to be much more intentional about creating that because it maybe doesn't exist as easily in our organization. And just to ask people to like do more learning and problem solving isn't helpful if we don't have the systems, structures, and tools to support that as well.
Yeah, and many of the clients I'm talking to, they're in I mean, obviously Toyota's huge.
Yeah.
So they're obviously people I'm talking to are much smaller organizations. I am in a much smaller
Yeah.
organization,
Yeah. Well, me
but
too.
I love the idea of like intentionally, proactively planning on learning being part of what the process is. Like it's
Mm,
part of it rather than it's always an exception. Like it's literally learning is the exception for any process I'm in typically to the process. Whereas
mm,
like you're talking about literally taking it one step further back and just creating room for learning, which
yes.
is it sounds simple, but it's really genius.
Well,
And I know that I'm not seeing it happen in
no.
most organizations I'm looking at.
Well, we and so I this is across the board in most Western organizations, I would say because we're in this habit of execution and doing. So we like plan, do. And really, so there's the plan, do, study, adjust cycle of learning, right? It's like the
Right.
scientific experiment. Toyota puts a lot more emphasis on the study and adjust phase, like the plan, do, study, adjust. And we, and I experience this for myself. I teach this, and yet I still experience we equate the action of doing with the impact. But really,
Right.
it's a balance. Impact comes from the collaborative, sort of synergistic action of doing and learning, doing and learning, doing and learning, doing and learning, and adjusting. And so if we miss out on that study part, we're just like throwing a ton of arrows and darts out, but we don't really know, are we doing it right? We need to adjust, like what's going on. And so slow
Right. Everybody
down,
wants to
pause.
correct and have the accurate thing being done, but nobody wants to spend the time to
To
do the
figure it out.
correction.
Yeah, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that's a big barrier for us. So slow down, pause, take a even if it's like 2 minutes, do a little bit more reflection. It's like, it doesn't have to be I mean, sometimes it needs to be bigger, but, like, if we can start building in these micro habits, it does accelerate impact in the end because 'cause we're getting smarter.
I think this might actually what you've just described kind of lead into the question I wanted to ask you next, which was, why does focusing on results first often
Mm.
undermine the outcomes that leaders are looking for?
Yeah, so I talk a lot about people first. It's people,
Hmm.
then process, and then results. And if we're focusing on the results or the business outcome only, we can be
Hmm.
actually driving the wrong behavior. And we see this, in, things like, oh, we have to have, on time delivery. Well, then people are maybe shortcutting quality or other things because that's the metric that you've put on this. Like, that's the
Right.
result that matters. Or we have these very convoluted processes and not very efficient or whatever. If we focus just on the results, we
Hmm.
might be able to get there. But if we focus on the people and the learning aspect, we're going to be able to build that sustainability to get there better and faster and in the long run and more effectively. Yes, we want results, but if we're more process oriented, we're going to be more effective ultimately over time in getting those results.
That makes sense, and I don't know, what would you recommend for a small business like
Mm,
myself or small businesses that are listening who don't already have this built into their
mm,
processes? They're in the Western world way of thinking
yep.
where we should correct. I don't have time for correction. I don't have time to do it right, but I do have time to do it twice.
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
would you get somebody that's new to try to adopt those processes to
Yeah. Well,
first
first,
value it, but then
yes,
adopt?
for sure, and I mean, this is for I think I have a small business as well, and I have to talk with my team members about how we do this and, as well, like, how do we build in that reflection and learning time? So, the first and foremost is like how much what is the impact of doing things twice, of all the waste? Like, think about like the time it takes to do the rework or the amount of money you're spending on supplies and parts for doing that. Like, quantify that because that's real. Like that, and if you can
Right.
do it better the first time, then you're actually saving a ton of time, money, and frustration for your people too. So it's even sort of learning to see and quantify the waste in our organization, all those levels. And then the thing that I recommend people do is start framing. So to start bringing in this sort of like learning mindset, if we can frame what we're doing as a hypothesis, we're going to do this and we expect X, like we're going to do X and we expect Y to happen. And then we can say in our short reflection, did what we expect actually happen as a result? If not, why not? Oh, that's interesting. What do we need to do differently? So the more we can frame our action as a hypothesis of what we think the impact of the action will be, we can have a place for reflection. It doesn't have to be super complicated or anything, but like, you know, I expect that if we do something different, we expect
Right.
it's gonna improve by a certain amount, or I as a leader, I expect, wow, if I can hold back in, like, offering my solution and ask a few more questions, I expect that my team members are going to come up with some better ideas, and let's see how that happen like, what happens as a result? I'm curious, right? So it helps bring in
Yeah.
that curiosity. So really simple, and it can happen across complex issues or simple, smaller processes or behaviors.
I am thinking of like what you're describing to me. I think it to me makes sense specifically in like an operational sense. Like I can
Yes.
see the benefit of that very easily. I can see how to communicate that, and it makes sense to the
Mhm.
team members involved. And I know that some of the challenges we talked about is almost from like a leadership perspective, where we've got to try to build this into the processes and make time and space for that, so that
Mm,
the corrections can happen and we can get the benefits over time. If you were talking to a leader, small business,
mm,
and that leader drives their business by results, maybe even by results that's been locked in by, let's just call it like the CFO, how would you articulate the
mm,
value of building in learning to a
mm.
CFO who's trying to identify it by the numbers?
Yeah. Well, again, I go back to this thing like if we're continuing to have all this waste and we don't have people who
Right.
can see the waste, then what's the quantifiable business metric on the time, the prod like or I guess the supplies, all those things. So quantify that and then go back
Right.
to, well, if we focus on having more learning, we expect that we're going to see a reduction in waste, if we frame it around that. And then say, okay, well, did that actually happen? Can we actually measure? Are
Right.
we actually seeing that our team members are able to use their creativity to focus on process improvement, and then what is the result of that? So you can definitely quantify it. And that, no matter what organizations I've been working for, large healthcare organizations, we're always like, well, what's the value of like focusing on people and learning and process improvement? There's tangible and intangible value, but all of
Right.
that can be translated to ROI for the business, really. And we just have to get better at that value chain. Leadership behaviors leads to like our people's capability, which leads to process improvement, which leads to tangible and intangible outcomes, which leads to true like results for the organization. And the more we can start looking at that, how we tell that story and measure it is really helpful.
I wish I was in an like, that sounds like a fantastic way to kind of tie everything together, and I can see myself in my own business. I can see my clients go into their business, and when they run into a problem, all hands on deck, like, heads down, focusing on the problem, and being able to, like, still maintain not just a process, but, like, a process that ties through the entire organization, the growth of the organization, and not letting yourself get derailed. I don't know if I'm asking a question, but it seems difficult to me to maintain that level of, like, widespread focus
Mm,
and diligence to growth, and not letting people who maybe are in small businesses used to just firefighting, like we've talked about,
yeah.
jumping in and solving the problem while trying to hold on to the value of let the process
Mm.
work the kinks out.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it's
Someone's
like
gotta let go of
growing pains,
control.
it's right, it's like it's growing pains within your organization because, when you're super small, you are kind of the doer, the jack of all trades, right? And if you want to set the organization, the business up for that next level of growth, it also means there has to be a shift in how you're performing, you're acting, what the responsibility of your team members are, the systems and structures you need for the organization. Because if you're trying to have a larger company, you're at that next level of growth, but you're still functioning at that other level, you're gonna crumble, right? So it's not gonna happen. This happens at all different levels of stages. If going from like a small, super small company to that next level, and then even to like a broader enterprise, like you have to solidify and shift, and that's gonna be hard because we have to let go of some things, but
Sure.
redefine what that means, and grow capabilities as well at all levels of the organization.
Sounds like I'm assuming you've had these kinds of conversations with leaders themselves who are trying to evolve
Mm,
themselves, their own
yeah,
businesses. Sounds like these would be difficult conversations to have, and sometimes, well, it can be difficult conversations to have because sometimes they may recognize, I don't have the skill set or the habits to take it to the next level
yep,
yet,
yep,
and that's probably where you come in. You're trying to give them the advice and the roadmap to get there because maybe they haven't done it themselves yet.
yeah.
On that, before we wrapped up, I really wanted to ask you about if you could take 60 seconds
Mm.
and you could go into the past and give yourself one piece of advice only, because that's all the time you have,
No.
and to prepare yourself to be more effective in whatever direction in life you were trying to go, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give yourself?
Yeah. Well, the one piece of advice really would come down to what we've talked about here today, because what I've been sharing is really from learned experience. It's that your value doesn't depend on your expertise of doing. Your value is about how do you create those conditions for learning across an organization. So you got to get out of that habit of sharing all your great ideas all the time. Doesn't mean your great ideas aren't great ideas, but that is that the right place and time. And so break that telling habit and really focus on your intention. Like, what's the impact you want to have, and how are the behaviors or how you're showing up? Does that really align with that? And those can be those aha moments. And when I had those realizations for myself, I started to make those shifts because I realized how I'm showing up is no longer serving the impact I want to have or need to have at this time in my life.
That is great advice to yourself. And now that you're back into the present, I wanted to ask you, what is a book you're reading right now that you think would be good for other people to, other
Oh,
than your own, which I do want to point to. I want you to tell me, other than your own book, what's a good book for somebody to read who's
oh my
trying
gosh.
to develop themselves?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many books. It's not a book I'm currently reading right now, but it's a book I often go back to. So, The Coaching Habit by Michael Bungay Stanier. He's been on my podcast as well, and it really talks about some really simple coaching questions. It's like the book I wish I had written because I think it's very simple and practical about coaching questions you can ask that really help bring things forward. So, It's a classic. It's been out for a decade, but if you haven't read it, The Coaching Habit, it's very accessible by Michael Bungay Stanier. And then go listen to him on my podcast, Chain of Learning.
And for your own book, where should listeners go to pick up Leading to Learn and Learning to Lead?
Yeah, so it's learning to lead, leading to learn. So you gotta learn to lead first, and then you can lead to learn, but it is a cycle. So learning to lead, leading to learn is available on Amazon or your favorite, online retailer. It's also on Audible. So if you prefer to listen, you can listen to me read the book and get some insights from
Awesome.
little clippets from Mr. Yoshino as well. And it's available in ebook, hardback, soft pack, um, paperback, whatever, softback,
All
paperback.
the ways.
All the ways in audio too. So, yep, the easiest place is probably, on Amazon, but it's available across online retailers as well. And you can go
Awesome.
check
Well,
out, my website in the book, like learning to lead, leading to learn.com, and then kbjanderson.com as well.
perfect. Well, thank you so much, Katie. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for the advice and for the resources that we can go check out. I'm going to point listeners to go check that out after this episode. Thank you again, and looking forward to chatting again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David.
Hey, thanks for listening to this episode of Lead Smarter. And thank you to the partners and sponsors who believe in our mission to evolve ourselves to elevate others. Speaking of elevating others, if you liked this episode, please be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and share. It would mean a lot to me and the team that works so hard behind the scenes so we can all learn together. And of course, thank you to the expert guests who kindly join us as generous guides on our journey to lead smarter.